She's my landlady, 20 years older, impossibly graceful, and she said she doesn't want this to get complicated. But my heart has other plans. Moving into a new apartment is always a mix of excitement and nerves, but nothing had prepared me for meeting her. My landlady. She wasn't just older. She carried herself with a kind of quiet authority that made the air around her feel different, almost electric. I remember stepping into the apartment for the first time, boxes in my arms, and feeling suddenly aware of every detail in the room, and more than that, of her presence. She was standing near the doorway, casually leaning against the frame, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Her hair fell loosely around her shoulders, catching the late afternoon light in subtle golden streaks. She wore something simple, elegant, a soft blouse and tailored pants, but somehow it seemed effortless, like she didn't need to try to command attention, and yet she did. There was a calm confidence in the way she moved, a gentle precision in every gesture. The way she reached for the clipboard, the slight tilt of her head as she studied me, the soft click of her heels on the floor. When she introduced herself, her voice was measured, warm but restrained, like she was offering kindness on careful terms. "I'm your landlady," she said. "I don't want this to get complicated." The words were simple, casual even, but they struck me. There was an underlying seriousness, a hint that she carried boundaries carefully, and I respected that immediately. I shook her hand, and it lingered a moment longer than I expected. Her palm was warm, her grip firm yet gentle. That brief contact sent a small spark through me, the kind you try to ignore but can't quite. I noticed details that I shouldn't have: her subtle perfume, the faint scent of jasmine and something else, maybe vanilla, drifting in the air. The way her eyes, a rich, deep brown, held a hint of curiosity as she looked at me. Even the sound of her laughter when she made a polite joke felt like it left a trace in the room, a soft echo I couldn't shake. As she walked through the apartment, showing me the space, I couldn't help but feel my pulse quicken slightly at every brush of her hand against mine, every accidental closeness as I handed her a box or opened a window for her. She was graceful, confident, and undeniably aware of her effect. And yet there was a subtle vulnerability, something quiet, almost hidden, in the way she paused by the kitchen window, looking out for a moment before smiling again. It made me think that the warning about complications wasn't just casual. It came from experience, from a place of care and caution. By the time she left, leaving me to settle in, I realized I was already captivated. Not just by her beauty or confidence, but by the warmth and restraint, the careful balance of friendliness and distance. I knew, almost instinctively, that this was going to be more than a simple tenant-landlady relationship. And just like that, the seed of curiosity, and something far more dangerous, far more thrilling, was planted. After the first day, life settled into a rhythm, but one that always seemed to include her in some quiet, unexpected way. The apartment building was small, and she had a habit of appearing just when I didn't expect it. Sometimes it was to collect a form, sometimes to check on a minor maintenance issue, and sometimes, I realized later, just to see me. Each encounter was brief, almost casual, but it left a mark. I started noticing things I hadn't on that first day. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the hall long after she passed, a warm, floral trace that seemed to wrap around me. The way her smile softened when she greeted me, just for a second longer than polite custom required. I found myself adjusting my own movements, unconsciously trying to make her notice me, even in the smallest ways. One evening, she caught me in the hallway carrying a box too heavy for my arms. Without a word, she stepped closer and steadied it for me. Our hands touched, fingers brushing, and I felt that familiar spark, gentle but insistent. I pulled back quickly, hoping I hadn't betrayed too much of my curiosity or something else, something I couldn't name yet. She didn't comment. She just smiled, a faint, knowing tilt of her lips, as if she understood exactly what had passed between us in that fleeting contact. We began sharing small moments, passing in the kitchen corridor, exchanging polite words about the weather, the mailbox, or a minor noise complaint. And yet, even these ordinary exchanges started to feel charged with unspoken energy. A hand lingering on the counter, a light touch on my shoulder as she passed by, a shared laugh that lasted a little longer than necessary. Each moment pulled me deeper into awareness of her presence. I started to notice details that weren't obvious at first glance. The subtle crinkle around her eyes when she genuinely smiled, the way her fingers traced the edge of a table absent-mindedly, the soft cadence of her voice that seemed to slow when speaking to me. It wasn't just attraction. It was fascination, an emotional gravity I didn't fully understand. And there were hints of vulnerability beneath her confident exterior. One rainy afternoon, she appeared at the door, umbrella dripping, her usual composure slightly cracked by the weather. I noticed a flicker of fatigue in her eyes, the way her shoulders slumped for just a moment before she straightened. I realized then that her "don't get complicated" warning wasn't just about propriety. It was personal. She was guarding herself, and I suddenly felt a surge of protectiveness that was both surprising and disconcerting. By the end of these small encounters, a quiet tension had begun to grow between us. Not a tension of conflict, but of possibility, the kind that lingers in a room long after the people have gone. I knew I was noticing more than I should, feeling more than I was ready to admit. And even as I tried to remind myself of the boundaries she had set, I realized that my curiosity, and maybe something more, was impossible to contain. As days turned into weeks, the casual encounters began to deepen into moments that felt charged, without either of us fully acknowledging it. Life in the apartment had a rhythm now, and she was a part of it more often than I expected. It wasn't anything dramatic, just shared spaces, quiet exchanges, but the effect was profound. One evening, the boiler went out, leaving the building chilly. She appeared at my door with a small toolkit and a frown of mild frustration. "You're lucky I'm here," she said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that contrasted with the evening chill. As we crouched side by side, fiddling with the pipes, our shoulders brushed repeatedly. Each accidental touch left a flicker of awareness, an almost imperceptible heat that traveled up my arm. I caught myself glancing at her profile, noting the way her hair fell in loose waves around her face, the delicate tilt of her jaw, the calm focus in her eyes as she worked. Another time, I found her in the hallway, crouched down to retrieve a fallen package. I offered to help, and as we lifted it together, our hands met on the cardboard, a gentle, lingering contact. Neither of us commented, but I felt it, a small, electric acknowledgement of proximity. Even mundane tasks seemed charged with meaning, and I realized that my awareness of her presence had shifted from curiosity to something far more attentive. It wasn't just touch that drew me in. It was the subtle ways she inhabited space. The way she leaned slightly closer to hear me better during conversations. The way she tilted her head when she listened, eyes soft and attentive. Even the silences between us felt intimate, comfortably long, yet full of anticipation. One evening, while sharing a quiet cup of coffee in the tiny kitchen, I noticed the warmth radiating from her as she sat close, her hand resting briefly near mine on the counter. I could feel the heat, subtle but undeniable, and it made me acutely aware of every detail. The scent of her perfume, the soft rustle of her clothes, the way her lips curved into a thoughtful smile. And yet, beneath the grace and poise, there was vulnerability. I saw it in fleeting expressions, the small sigh when she thought no one was looking, the brief downward glance that revealed a trace of weariness. Those glimpses made her seem human in a way that was both grounding and irresistible. I wanted to offer reassurance, to close that distance without overstepping, but the line she had drawn with her "don't get complicated" warning stayed firmly in place. By the end of these shared moments, it was impossible to ignore the tension that had developed between us. Not a dramatic, fiery tension, but one that thrummed softly beneath everyday interactions. A current running just beneath the surface of conversation, glance, and touch. I found myself thinking about her when I wasn't around, replaying these quiet encounters, and wondering if she felt it too. The pull was undeniable, subtle yet persistent, and it left me both exhilarated and cautious. Each shared space, each accidental brush of hands or shoulder, was a reminder. We were growing closer, step by step, and the slow burn had only just begun. The rhythm of our small, shared moments continued, but something had shifted. There was a quiet tension now, an unspoken understanding that neither of us could ignore. It wasn't about physical attraction alone. It was about seeing one another in ways that went deeper than casual politeness. And one evening, that depth became undeniable. I was returning from the grocery store when I noticed her sitting by the window in the lounge, the fading light of late afternoon spilling across her face. She hadn't noticed me yet, and for a moment I just watched. The way the sun caught her hair in subtle highlights, the soft line of her jaw as she rested her chin on her hand, lost in thought. She looked almost fragile in that moment, and I realized that the composed, confident woman I'd met days ago carried private vulnerabilities she rarely revealed. I hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt, but she looked up and smiled gently, patting the seat beside her. "Come, sit," she said softly, her voice a quiet invitation. There was something in the way she said it, warm, open, yet tinged with caution, that made my chest tighten. We sat together, a deliberate closeness that felt natural and yet charged. She spoke first, almost tentatively, sharing small stories from her life that she clearly didn't tell just anyone. Memories of a failed relationship, fleeting regrets about choices she had made, quiet reflections on loneliness and resilience. Each revelation was accompanied by subtle gestures, fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug, a sigh, a downward glance, that made her seem both strong and fragile at once. I listened intently, leaning slightly forward, careful not to crowd her but wanting to close the distance nonetheless. Every subtle movement of hers, the tilt of her head, the brief contact of her arm against mine, the warmth radiating from her as she shifted, felt magnified in the quiet room. The light around us softened the edges of reality, and for a moment, it felt like we existed only in that space, in that shared vulnerability. Then, almost imperceptibly, she reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from my forehead. It was fleeting, almost casual, but it carried a weight that neither words nor glances could fully convey. My heart surged at the contact, yet I restrained myself, aware of the boundaries she had set and the careful caution that governed her actions. It became clear that her warning about complications wasn't casual or flippant. It was deeply personal. She had built walls, and yet, in these quiet, shadowed moments, she was letting me see past them, letting me in without fully surrendering herself. The effect was intoxicating, a slow burn that made me aware of every detail. The softness of her voice, the warmth of her presence, the subtle vulnerability in her eyes. By the time I left that evening, I was acutely aware of the invisible thread that had begun to connect us. It wasn't about rushing toward romance or breaking boundaries. It was about noticing each other in ways that mattered, about understanding and being present. And in that quiet intimacy, the tension between us deepened, unspoken yet undeniable, setting the stage for something more profound to emerge. By now, the quiet familiarity between us had grown into something more insistent, though neither of us dared to name it aloud. Each encounter carried a weight I couldn't ignore, a subtle pull that seemed to draw us closer in ways both physical and emotional. It wasn't about grand gestures or declarations. It was in the small, almost imperceptible moments, the spaces between words, the warmth of proximity. It started in ordinary ways, sharing a cup of coffee in the kitchen, our shoulders brushing just slightly, sending a tingle through me I could neither explain nor resist. Passing in the hallway, our hands would graze as we exchanged keys or packages, and both times, we would pause just a fraction longer than necessary, caught in the electric awareness of each other's presence. The tension was quiet, patient, like the slow swell of a tide. One rainy evening, she appeared at my door, drenched and apologetic. I handed her an umbrella, and our hands met in the center. The touch lingered, a soft, unspoken acknowledgement of the connection that had been building between us. I noticed the way her hair clung to her neck, the warmth of her coat brushing against mine, and the faint scent of rain mixing with her subtle perfume. Her eyes, usually so guarded, softened for a fleeting moment, and I felt a rush of something I could not name. Desire, fascination, admiration, all rolled into one. It was in the small, intimate gestures too. She would tilt her head when listening to me, leaning just slightly closer than necessary. Her fingers would brush against a table or counter near mine, or she would tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear in my presence. Each motion was simple, almost incidental, but the awareness it sparked in me was profound. I caught myself noticing details I shouldn't have. The curve of her wrist, the warmth of her smile, the quiet way her laughter lingered longer when she was around me. There was a growing awareness that neither of us could fully ignore. The tension wasn't urgent or desperate. It was a slow, deliberate pull, a recognition of mutual curiosity and silent longing. And yet, there was restraint. Both of us cautious not to cross the boundaries she had so carefully set. Her warning, "I don't want this to get complicated," echoed in my mind every time our proximity lingered, every time a shared glance spoke volumes beyond our words. One evening, as we were rearranging some furniture in the hallway, our shoulders pressed together briefly, and I felt the warmth of her arm against mine. I dared a glance at her, catching her eyes just for a second. There was something there. Curiosity, hesitation, and an unspoken question. She smiled softly, a little knowingly, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if the world had shrunk to just the two of us. By the end of the night, the unspoken pull was undeniable. It had grown from fleeting touches and quiet moments into a current that neither of us could ignore. And though we maintained the polite boundaries, the awareness between us had transformed into something more. Something patient, electric, and impossible to name, waiting for the right moment to finally surface. The tension between us had grown impossible to ignore. It wasn't dramatic or loud. There were no shouting matches, no abrupt confessions. But every glance, every accidental touch, had built a quiet pressure that neither of us could contain. I sensed it in the way she hesitated before speaking, the soft pauses that stretched just a moment too long, the way her eyes searched mine for something she wasn't ready to name. And I, too, felt it in my chest. A mix of longing, fear, and the thrill of finally being close enough to acknowledge it. It happened on an ordinary evening, the kind that should have been mundane. I was helping her move a stack of books from the living room to her bedroom. A small favor, really, but even this simple task had become charged with a strange intimacy. Our hands brushed repeatedly on the spines of the books. Each touch lingered just slightly longer than necessary, the warmth of her skin imprinting itself in my memory. The air between us felt heavy with unspoken words, each glance and half-smile carrying more meaning than any conversation could. Then came the moment that changed everything. She paused midway down the hallway, her hand resting lightly on the doorframe. "We need to talk," she said, her voice low, almost hesitant, yet firm enough to make my heart skip a beat. There was no anger or reproach, only honesty. A truth she could no longer keep from herself or from me. We stood there, close enough to feel the warmth of each other's presence, but not touching. The silence stretched long enough for me to realize just how much I had been holding back, how much I had been yearning for this acknowledgement. And then, slowly, she began to speak. Not about boundaries, not about propriety, but about what she felt, what she had been trying to resist. She admitted the pull, the curiosity, the fascination that had grown between us. She confessed the fear behind her caution. Fear of complications, fear of losing control, fear of vulnerability. I listened, every word etching itself into my mind. And then I spoke, my voice quiet but certain, revealing the same emotions I had been trying to temper. The longing, the admiration, the slow-burning desire that had been building since the day I first saw her in the apartment doorway. Our confessions didn't need to be dramatic. They didn't need to solve everything instantly. They were simply acknowledgement. A mutual understanding that what existed between us was real, undeniable, and worth facing, no matter how complicated it seemed. And then, as if the air itself had shifted, she reached out. Her fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from my face, lingering just a moment too long. I felt her warmth, her proximity, and the weight of everything we had left unsaid. Neither of us spoke, but in that quiet, charged moment, everything became clear. The emotional tension, the slow-building attraction, the careful restraint, all of it had led to this. By the time the evening ended, we had not crossed any lines we weren't ready for. But the truth hung between us like a tangible thread, binding us in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. The unspoken pull had finally been named, and neither of us could ever return to pretending it didn't exist. After that evening, everything had changed. The unspoken pull, the quiet tension, the lingering touches and stolen glances, they were no longer just subtle hints. We had acknowledged them, given them names, and faced the feelings we had been holding back for weeks. And yet, the world outside our little apartment remained the same, with its routines, responsibilities, and boundaries. The question now was not whether we felt something for each other. It was how we would move forward, fully aware of the risks, fully aware of ourselves. The first morning after our confession, I found her in the kitchen, sunlight spilling over the counter, casting a warm glow on her face. She was making tea, the faint scent of chamomile filling the air. When she saw me, she smiled softly, a mixture of reassurance and something more intimate, something that said, without words, "We're here now, and we'll navigate this together." I walked over, careful not to crowd her, and our hands brushed briefly as I took a cup from her. The simple contact sent a familiar thrill through me, tempered now by understanding rather than tension. We began to navigate our days with a new rhythm. Small touches became intentional but gentle, a hand on the small of my back as we passed through a doorway, her fingers brushing against mine when handing me a folded receipt, the warmth of a shoulder pressed briefly against mine in the hallway. There were lingering glances that spoke more than words ever could, quiet smiles exchanged over morning coffee, the occasional shared laughter that seemed to fill the apartment with light. Each gesture was a choice, a reminder that we were together, cautiously but wholeheartedly. And there were conversations, deeper and more honest than ever before. We talked about boundaries, about fears, about what the future might hold. She admitted her concern about complications still, but her tone was lighter now, tinged with hope rather than apprehension. I shared my own hesitation, my own worries about age, perception, and the inevitable uncertainties. Through it all, we listened, we laughed, we reassured, building trust that was slow but unbreakable. One evening, after a long day, we sat together on the small balcony, city lights twinkling below. I felt the warmth of her hand in mine, steady and grounding. She leaned slightly against me, the soft press of her shoulder enough to make my heart race while also calming it. "Maybe complications aren't so bad," she whispered, her voice carrying both mischief and sincerity. "If it's with you." I smiled, squeezing her hand gently. That moment, the soft, lingering connection, the shared warmth and quiet laughter, was enough. We didn't need to rush, didn't need grand declarations. We had each other, fully aware of what it meant to be together, and that was enough. The boundaries, the caution, the fear, they were still there, yes, but they no longer held power over the connection we had chosen to nurture. By the time the evening faded into night, it was clear. We had arrived at a place of understanding, trust, and affection. Together, cautiously but fully aware of the depth of what we felt. The slow burn that had begun in accidental touches and quiet glances had grown into something deliberate, warm, and sustaining. A connection neither of us could ignore, and both of us were ready to embrace. If you felt every stolen glance and quiet moment with us, hit that like button and subscribe for more slow burn romance stories. Share your thoughts in the comments. Would you take a chance on a love that feels this intense, even if it's complicated?